by numbers. And sometimes you can tell, if you go around an exhibition and look at paintings and so forth, you can see whether something's actually started from scratch, bare paper, with a pencil or pen or whatever, and drawn it, or whether they've used some quick method of getting it down. And I learned a really big lesson with this. It didn't cause my divorce. I didn't have a divorce, actually. But it didn't cause it, but it could have done very closely. And that is, about 9-10 years ago, I did a series of portraits of my wife. And to get it right, I took photographs and then blew them up, and then used the graphic transfer method or whatever, and sometimes squared it and so forth, then painted it. But once I painted it, I thought, that is not my wife. It really is. The shapes were correct. I got so frustrated, I actually put a ruler and measured, photographed against what I was painting, and it was all right, it was fine, but it wasn't my wife. And so I thought, right, let's forget that. And so I got her to sit down, and I just sketched from her actually sitting there, and then painted it, and concentrated on the tones and everything else and so forth. My pencil drawing, freehand pencil drawing, was quite incorrect. But the painting itself, I felt, was more my wife. I got the feeling that she was my wife, rather than this sort of amalgamation of shapes that came from the graphic transfer. And I'll show you, these were done, I actually used to date my sketches and drawings, so that was done, 2009, so that's 9 years ago. Okay, and that was done by graphic transfer. And it's not her. I mean, the hair looks as though it's there's a jellyfish that's been shoved on top, seaweed, or whatever. I know my painting's not that good at that point anyway. But it just didn't look like that. And so when I did a sketch, this is quite different, and it's incorrect. But there's a lot more life to it. There's a lot more shape to it. The skull, I've really started to look into, the fact that the eye sockets are sunk in and so forth. Rather than just doing what the graphic transfer thing dictated, and just put colour onto it, I actually started to think about what I was doing. Right? And it was a stark reminder to me, a real lesson, that if you take shortcuts sometimes, it's not good. Sometimes we do, I still do it occasionally, but if you get into a bad habit of doing it for everything, it is a bad habit. You're not training your eye, you're not training your brain, you're not really getting under the skin of the subject. And the other things I didn't show you, these were still lifes that I did with an artist up in Corsham, Geoffrey Williams Glover, which you might have heard about. And these were just still lives, done straight in with a paintbrush, no drawing at all. And that thing there is actually it's a stone rabbit. But in other words, taking the shape of one object by another object behind it and so on. And you end up with something which is looser, which is perhaps a bit more abstract. That was another one. Okay, so using the background there to give me the shape of the handle of that jug and so forth. So these were done about 9-10 years ago. But I feel that there's more vibrancy about them, because I wasn't having to concentrate too much on getting the shape with the pencil. I was going straight in with a brush, and therefore having to really think about tones and so forth. Okay. So it's an exercise to do. Get a bunch of flowers, get some pots and pans, sit down, no pencil, no ruler, straight in with brush, and just try it. You will, your first attempts will be appalling, absolutely appalling, as mine will. But it becomes good fun when it starts to come together. Okay, now I'm going to do this painting with sunset and so forth. And I'm going to use one or two different watercolour techniques which you may not have used yourselves before. I'm going to use a bit of, if I remember to use it, I'm going to use a bit of splatter using masking fluid. Wet against wet, wet into wet. And also layering on different layers of transparent paint to build this thing up, which is something we often tend not to do. The subject is Pinmill. Pinmill is one of my old sailing ports on the East Coast. it's on the River Stour. So you've got Harwich and Dover Court, comes around, you've got River Stour, you've got River Orwell going up there. You've got HMS Ganges, or what was HMS Ganges, at the shop. I can remember as a kid living in Harwich and Dover Court. They had a mast on their parade ground, and you could see it across the water. And on certain evenings, you could hear them dressing the mast. And dressing the mast is where you have all the cadets to the music of a band, a marine band, going up step by step, and gradually going up the ratlins, going up across the yard arms, going up, out, and so forth. This mast was about, I don't know, getting on to 200 feet off a concrete ground. And they would do this, and then finally, the button boy would go up. And the button boy was usually the youngest boy. And I can remember seeing this with binoculars and so forth. And his job was to sit right on top of the mast, on the button, which is the disc on the top, cross his legs, cross his arms, and that was all. There was no safety lines or anything at all, and just sit on top. Well, the band was playing down, probably peeing himself, until eventually the bugle went and they could do the whole thing in reverse. When that poor boy got to the bottom, he was probably shaking like a leaf. So lots of naval history. River Orwell, as I say, Pinmill, and the centre subject, the building there, is the Butt and Oyster pub. If you ever get a chance to go to the Butt and Oyster, go to the Butt and Oyster. It's a good place. The old time sailing barges used to sail up there, dry out on the flats, and then the wagons would come down with the hay and so on and so forth. For those 2 or 3 of you who have read my book, A Slight Mist on the Horizon, which goes through my early sailing years, the Butt and Oyster features in that, because I met a guy when I was sailing on the Thames who came up Thames with a lovely old sailing craft, and he would tell us, as 13 and 14-year-old lads, he'd tell us long stories about picking up, what's her name, Sally Brackett, who was the barmaid at the Butt and Oyster, picking her up, sailing around the south coast, having all sorts of funs and frolics and so forth. So it has lots of wonderful memories to me, which are very dear. Now, I've already drawn this out to save time, but just to show you what I'm going to do. In arrangement, there are 3 photographs there. The top one on the right-hand side is a Thames sailing barge, 80 feet long, 18 feet wide, 80 tons, right? And I've seen one of those sail up the River Orwell, tacking against the wind, crewed by 1 man, 1 boy, and 1 dog. So they were able to sail these things with a very, very short crew these creeks and so forth. So there's a Thames sailing barge. There's the Butt and Oyster with the motors and so forth. The boat down below, actually that's, I'm going to have that moored. That is a, what do I call it? It's a Safe Harbour 12. It's a boat I designed for an American about 7 or 8 years ago now. It's about 24 feet long and so forth. And it's based on a very, very old design by Rose and Crown and Shield, so it's got quite a pedigree. And what I'm going to do is basically off-centre the thing a little bit, have a simple Butt and Oyster pub thingy. So that's where I'm going to have my pub more or less there. I'm going to put the Thames sailing barge in front of it. This is what I often do, is to do a tonal sketch. A landmass I'll have coming out here. I'll bring it down around here with these sort of salt flats and so forth. And then this yacht I'll have moored, I'll have it over here. The whole idea is to try and draw the eye in, and then we've got these lovely verticals, these nice masts and so forth. There'll be a mast coming up here and so forth. We'll have a nice light background this way here. Bring that out down there and so forth. And this will get quite sparkly down here, hopefully with the masking fluid and so forth. And that will hopefully take the eye in and take you round and into the Butt and Oyster, which will be darkish, but which I'll leave some white on as well. So that'll sort of take the eye in. And then I'll try to arrange it so the sun as it sets us over here. We'll see how that goes. Okay, and then one or two other masks and so forth as well. This will be largely yellow and orange and red and so forth, with blue coming in from the left-hand side and coming across. So hopefully it will make quite a nice picture. But the idea is that I'm trying to take the eye in through these saltings here and through this boat, which will be a little bit more stark, a little bit darker than the rest of them, around and into the Butt and Oyster pub. Okay. Now, as I say, I've got it already sketched out. And the first thing I'm going to do is to put a little bit of masking fluid on it. Last time I used this masking fluid, I find the top's very difficult to get off, and it's probably going to do the same now. It came off and I ended up spilling it all over me. Foul stuff. I don't like using it if I can avoid it. So I'm going to put a bit of splatter down here, and that will give you a slightly sparkling effect on the foreshore. That will dry quite quickly. And I'll put a little bit on the sun there, and just little bits coming down, reflecting on the water. Okay. When you're using masking fluid, you want to put the brush straight away into water. That brush has always had it, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. I don't want to mess up that water there. So just round that off a little bit. Good. Okay. Now, I'm going to set the whole thing up with the sunset. And so I'm going to put on some yellows and reds and so forth over most of the painting, leaving little bits on the left-hand side blue. And the way to do that is to use a nice big brush. And I'm going to wet the entire paper. And by wetting it, it'll slow the process down and give me time. It'll buy me some time. Because I want to get these washes on quickly so that there are no hard edges on them. So make sure the whole thing's nice and wet. The paper I'm using is Arches 300 gram rough, which to my mind is just basically one of the best papers you can get. It's stretched using the quick stretch method that I've shown before. It's lovely because the Arches paper absorbs the water slowly and therefore remains slightly damp for quite some considerable time. Right. The first colour, you can take notes of this if you like, as you go through, I'm going to put on, is a cold yellow. Yellows are normally associated with being warm, but Yew Gamboge is quite a cold yellow. Wash it in from the right hand side. I'm going to bring it fairly well across, but I'm going to leave some areas which is pure white, into which later on I'll put another wash, which will be pure blue. Good. And then, whilst that's still wet, I'm going to build that up. I'm going to use another yellow, which is a warmer yellow, which is Indian yellow. These are all Winsor & Newton colours. I find Winsor & Newton some of the best paints you can get. Warm it up a little bit more down here. Okay. So a nice golden yellow like that. And then I'm going to use an orange, and the orange I'm using is Windsor orange. Cad orange is quite opaque, quite chalky, whereas Windsor orange is semi-transparent. So, not quite as intense as the Cad orange. Bring that across. Not too fixed. Warm it up down here in the foreground a bit. It's drying off quite quickly, which is a bit of a menace, so don't matter too much. And then I'll finish off with this phthalo red, which is a favourite colour used by Elvira Castanet. Quite intense. It's dripping like that. If I take a dry brush, or dryish, and just drag that, it'll take some of those swirl marks out. I want to leave the building here, it's white anyway, I want to leave it sort of whitish, so I'm just going to take out some of that colour. Not too much. Okay, so I'm just regaining that building slightly. This is a dry brush, this is just using it to stroke the paint through a little bit.
Has that all dried now, Paul?
It's getting very close to dry, yeah. It's very, 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 very warm. I might have to come back and do a little bit more on that, but it doesn't matter, we'll see. Okay. Just take out some of the light there as well where we've got the reflection. Okay, good. So that's really the first wash, and what I'm going to do is take it over there and dry it. The next stage, it needs to be completely bone dry. So if you just excuse me for a second, I'll just dry that off. Okay. So that's the first series of washes. I'm now going to put on, and those are more or less transparent. I'm now going to put on another wash, coming from this side, using cobalt blue. And again, what you want to do here is to cover the whole painting with water before you start. If you don't do that, you put another wash on, you'll end up with hard edges. If you put the water on very, very carefully, without working it into the wash that's already there, then it shouldn't lift and you shouldn't get any muddy patches. So on goes the water again.
Could you use a sort of a plant spray?
Yes, you can do. Yes.
Same.
Yeah, I find with the sprays, I do use sprays quite a bit. You can't always guarantee what's going to go. Here, I want to cover the entire thing with water anyway, so a big brush. And this one, I think, is goat hair, I think. What's the poor old goat? Gave us this. Right. So, I'm going to use some cobalt. Note the use of the big John Pike, American John Pike mixing tray. You want a big area to mix paints in when you're doing this sort of work. And with watercolours, you know I was putting different colours on there. It's important that the successive colours you put on are slightly drier than the initial ones. It's a little bit wet. Slightly wetter than I wanted to. I won't overdo that. I will use a bit of, if I can find it, a bit of ultramarine. With the blues, blues are associated with cold colours. Cerulean blue is the coldest blue. Cobalt is a middle warm blue or cold blue. And ultramarine is the warmest blue. So you can use ultramarine quite easily in foregrounds like this. I might go over that again. Try that across. Maybe a little bit in the sky. So that's, I put on cobalt and now this is a little bit of ultramarine. That'll do. Good, okay. I've lost the Butt and Oyster. So, let's try and get the Butt and Oyster back a bit. I'm going to put some darks around that anyway, so it won't matter too much. And when you want things to really stand out and give yourself contrast, the darker you put a colour around a light area, the lighter the light area actually appears to be. I know that sounds a bit strange, but you'll see what happens in a minute when I do that. Just reclaim that slightly. So, if I do that, I'm just going to dry that off. Okay, right. Find the white brush. Now with these colours, the good colours to go in and give yourself contrast and so forth are sort of the browns and violets and so forth. So I'm going to mix up using burnt umber and violet and so forth. And just start working in some distant trees. And they're quite distant. And down here, where you've got closer trees and bushes and so forth, I'm just going to make that go a bit fuzzy. So when I go back